I'm Neil Tyson, and I'm interviewing my uncle, a retired Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hargett, and his experiences in the Vietnam War. All right. In Vietnam, where were you stationed?
I was stationed at Bien Hoa Air Base in Thuc Vinh and Song Bay.
What years did you see service in Vietnam?
In Vietnam from January of 1969 to January of 1970.
Since you were in the Air Force, were you part of the Rolling Thunder campaign?
No, the Rolling Thunder campaign was a out-of-country mission performed by B-52s. Much later on, I think that was in the early 70s under the Nixon administration.
What planes did you fly?
Flew the F-100, there was a fighter jet, and the Super Sabre, and the OV-10, which is a forward air controller aircraft, a twin-engine turboprop.
Tell me about your favorite one.
I enjoyed the F-100 the most, although the OV-10 also had its advantages. The F-100 was very fast and a fun airplane to be in with single seat. We always liked it. It was a nice airplane in that regard, but it was an old airplane. It was very difficult to fly. The OV-10, on the other hand, had two engines, and you could stay aloft for 3 hours, and it had some aspects of it that were very enjoyable. But of the two, I would say I prefer the F-100.
What was a typical mission like on the F-100?
Well, we were doing ground air support, close air support for the troops, and a typical mission would be a troops in contact mission, where the troops are engaged in the enemy, and they pulled back a few meters, 100 meters, and tried to get some space between them and the enemy, and requested close air support. So the forward air controller would either be scrambled or we'd be on a frag sortie and diverted, and in that circumstance, and the forward air controller would describe the tactical situation and tell you what the run-in line was and authorize the parameters, and then you'd come in and drop your bombs. If the troops in contact, it was mostly high-drag 500-pound bombs and napalm, and we used 20-millimeter guns.
Do you ever recall any specific engagement?
Well, there were some more interesting than others. Probably the most interesting one I recall was a night scramble sortie. We had an alert pad that was maintained around the clock, and all 4 squadrons maintained airplanes on the line. You would be scrambled in accordance with your order, and sometimes in accordance with your load. Some airplanes would have hard loads, some airplanes would have soft loads. If you're going to do troops in contact or something involving close work to the ground, you would scramble the soft load, which would include airplanes that have napalm and high drag, as opposed to slick bombs. So we were sitting on alert one night, and I recall thinking to myself, I never went to bed, because I was always in the belief that as soon as I got to bed, surely I would be scrambled. But that night it was raining very hard, and the thunderstorms were all throughout the region of South Vietnam. And I thought it highly unlikely that a soft load would be scrambled, so I went to bed. And sure enough, they scrambled our airplane. I remember when the klaxon went off, I remember thinking to myself smugly, some poor soul's got to go out and fly in this horrible weather. I'm so glad it's not me. And then they yelled out, Scramble Hawk 12, and that was our call sign. So I'm out of bed in a heartbeat and getting dressed as quickly as I could and putting on my G-suit and out the door into this thunderstorm, and off we go. And it involved a group down in a little outpost down in the southern part of Vietnam near Cambodian border that was being overrun. And the Vietnamese NVA and the Viet Cong selected that night the worst possible weather to do it, in the belief that they couldn't get support. So we were called in and we had to operate under very low weather conditions and lots of wind, lots of rain. And I had the napalm, and it was the most difficult sortie in my view, because the commander of the outpost asked that we put the napalm on the berm. They were being overrun. That meant they were calling the weapons in on themselves, because they're on the berm. That's where the fighting is. So they said they were going to pull back. They want the napalm right on the berm. So the flare light went off. I rolled down, and there was such a strong wind. You got to kind of understand the detail of the ordnance to understand the pressure I was under, because a napalm can will drift 10 foot per knot of wind. We had at least 20 knots of wind, maybe more. And so that meant that I was looking at a 200-foot drift. Well, the whole compound wasn't 300 feet across. So that meant for me to hit the west side of the berm where we were working on, I had to have my pipper 2/3 of the way placed into the compound. And that's a little disconcerting. The only thing that gives you peace is that you can see your aircraft in a crab, even though you're doing 450. You can feel the crab, you can see it. So you know the wind is there. You just pray that it continues. Because if the wind were to cease for some reason, I mean, I'd be dropping napalm right in the middle of the guys. So I dropped the napalm and pulled off and was greatly relieved to hear the cheers and the great job. It's right where we wanted it, and took out a lot of bad guys and did hurt the good guys.
Okay. You talked about being scrambled. What did that mean?
Well, that meant you were on alert pad, and the troops in contact or a heavy situation would come up throughout the day and the evening, and you were scrambled. You were literally sitting there ready to fly. You had the aircraft in what was called a hot cocked condition. All the bomb, everything was on it, everything was fueled and ready to go. And you'd go out and jump in the airplane and you used a different start mechanism. It was a hot start, it's called. We used a rocket cartridge, which was something that looked like a giant shotgun shell, and it would burn and provide exhausting gases into the system and turn the engine over without having to use an air system. So it was designed for that. But we'd be out in the cockpit and rolling within probably 3 minutes. So, as opposed to a normal start would take you about a half hour to get going.
Okay. Were you ever involved in a dogfight?
No. Thankfully, that airplane was not one that would have done well in any dogfight. Other than to leave, it was the fastest airplane I ever flew, pointing at the ground. So that was your exit maneuver. But it was not a really good aircraft for air-to-air. Although we practiced it, we did a minimal amount of it. The airplanes we would have come up against, had they come across the border, MiG-21s, MiG-19s, would have been far superior to what we could have done. Although, if you could sneak up on one, if you had an AIM-9 missile, which we didn't carry, you could have done something. Our only offensive weapon for air-to-air would have been the guns, which meant that you had to do a hassle with the guy, and it's very, very difficult stuff. You either survive your first one or you don't. You have to have the presence to leave the battle in order to not die and something like that, because you can't let your emotions take over. And it's a very difficult thing. To fly air-to-air in an F-100 was hard to do, and the F-4 was far more suited for that, did much better for it.
Well, the planes you flew were advanced for time. Would you change anything on it about the planes you flew?
Well, yeah, sure. When I went to fly the F-100, but I mean, it wasn't going to happen. When I went and flew the F-100, I was surprised at how arcane and how obsolete it was. The T-38 was a very advanced airplane for training. Very fast, strong, quick acceleration, very predictable performance, a wonderful stick, good feel and feedback. By contrast, the F-100 had a very sloppy stick and had very sloppy controls, and was an easy airplane to get out of control. You had to learn, and it was a hard airplane to point. Everything about it was difficult. That's why there was no way that the F-100 would have been upgraded beyond what it was. It was an adequate airplane for what it was, and it was surprising how good you could become at overcoming its deficiencies. Airmanship was really what was required. You really had to be good. As these systems get better and better, the F-16, for example, is just a wonderful platform. And it doesn't require as much airmanship, but it gives the pilots more time to devote to tactics and not worrying so much about keeping the airplane in the air and keeping it from departing. So things have been made a lot more elegant for the pilot with higher thrusts and flight control computers flying the airplane and assisting in these things and keeping you away from angles of attack that depart the airplane. But no, the F-100 was okay. I guess the one thing I would have changed if I could have would have been the night lighting. The night lighting on the F-100 was absolutely awful, and that was a very difficult thing to accommodate. It seemed to me that could have been improved.
Did you ever have any exciting or tense moments flying F-100?
Well, yeah, a number. I had a number of tense moments. It was one time I got disoriented in a dive because we were flying in a day when it was heavy haze. When there's a lot of haze, there's no discernible horizon. So you have to look down at the ground, and since we were doing air-to-ground attacks, you dive at the ground. And I wound up in about a 60-degree dive in that airplane, which was a difficult dive to recover from. And I had to abandon the run once I realized what I'd done. And that was tense, because I came within 1,000 feet probably of disaster.
Did you ever crash an airplane?
No, I never crashed one. No.
Did you ever have to eject from pulling them?
I had to eject from 2 airplanes. The first time was very terse situation, and I came to understand then that there is a God, and He's a personal God, and He cares for individuals, because I called out to Him, and it's my solid belief that had I not done that, I would have died, because the aircraft was totally out of a recoverable position. And without describing the dynamics, which would take a long time, I was convinced that I was dead. And I called on the Lord and said, "You got it," which is a phrase that pilots use to transfer control airplanes in two-seaters. And I passed out, but I came to a couple of seconds later, and the aircraft had leveled off, probably 25 feet off the deck, a very small, slight climb. I ran through a tree line, slowed the airplane up, and had to eject a few seconds later. And went from out of control, modestly in control, to out of control very quickly. Wound up in a parachute above a burning airplane, thought I was going to be consumed in a fireball. That didn't happen by a microsecond. And I was picked up probably 15, 20 minutes later as the sun was setting in the west, and the enemy was still visible on the horizon just a mile away. And in the middle of unlike North Vietnam, where there was a lot of karst and jungle and terrain that you could hide in, down in South Vietnam, in the area I was in, it's called the U Minh Forest, there was no place to hide. I was out in the middle of an old rice paddy that was been plowed, and the only thing near me was a canal, and the tree lines and the paths all led to the town that we were attacking. And had I spent the night, I would have been captured undoubtedly. So very, very fortunate. And I was about 3 months later, I had to eject again after my engine exploded, and it was a far more controlled environment, but equally as tense, because I wound up landing near the Mekong River, which is a very wide river. And near the guy's house, I could just look right up the road to see the smoke coming up from the area where we were bombing. And I counted about 14 people looking at me as I was coming down to shoot. And I was thinking, my gosh, this is not going to be good, because I'm going to be standing here looking at these people. Fortunately, what I thought was grass from looking down at it was probably 6-foot-tall reeds. So I disappeared into the reeds along the edge of the river. The fact came up and started working my situation very quickly. My flight lead nearly blew the guy's house down with a very high-speed afterburner run over his house, which was a nice signal to say, "Stay away from my boy." And that was comforting. But as I looked, I was right on the edge of the river, and I'll never forget parting the reeds of the river to look at a Vietnamese kneecap. It was just unbelievable. This guy had pulled his sampan up right next to where I was, and as I looked up at him, he was looking out over me. There was 3 of them in the sampan, all wearing their little black pajamas, which does not mean they're VC, but that's what VC all wore. And you just don't know who your friends or enemies are down there. And not wanting to hurt these guys or have them come hurt me, I just closed the reeds and backed away 3 feet and got my gun out and just sat there. And the disconcerting thing to me was I began to think these were probably friendly people, and they just happened to be there, or neutral anyway. But as the helicopter was coming to pick me up, I picked up the sound of AK-47 fire very nearby. And an AK-47 and M16 have very different reports, and it was very obvious it was AK-47. But I ran for the helicopter and got picked up and out of there, and very fortunately wasn't hurt that time. So I felt very fortunate to survive those 2.
What kind of armament what kind of arms did you carry with you?
On a personal basis, you mean?
Yeah, in situations like that.
Well, we carried a bandolero. We carried 38s, which are not a very powerful weapon, but the police have used them in the United States in the 50s and 60s for a long time. So it was a 38 special, and we had lots of ammunition for the bandoleros, and we had the most important thing we had, frankly, was the survival radio and water. And we carried I learned the truth that when your body is stimulated with a lot of adrenaline, that you get cotton mouth and you cannot speak. When you've gone through a very tense situation like that, it's absolutely amazing. Nothing prepares you for it except training. But you get your radio out and realize you can't say a word. And the only thing that pulls you back to reality, snaps you back to some common sense, is the presence of nice cold water. So we, as fighter pilots, we flew with a flask of frozen water. We keep those in our. When we went to get our gun and our parachute and our gear, the last thing we would pick up was a frozen water flask out of the freezer and stick it in our GC pocket. And typically, by the end of the sortie, about 2/3 of that would be melted, and you could sit there at the end of the runway as you were de-arming the airplane and have a nice long swig of water. But you preserved it. You didn't drink it during the flight. You preserved it in case you had to get shot down like I did. And that was just a wonderful thing to sit there in those very tense environments and to be able to open up a flask of ice-cold water. Very refreshing and literally brings you back to the situation and opens up your tongue and your throat so you can talk. That was very important. The gun was there as the last-ditch maneuver. The last thing you wanted to do was use the gun in a ground environment. The only way you would use it is if you were going to be, if capture was imminent and or your rescue was imminent, to at least make a last-ditch run to try and get rescued. The worst thing you could do is pull this thing out and start playing like a cowboy in the midst of a number of people. It wasn't there for that reason. It was there for last-minute self-protection.
Did you have any other like comfort items, like a pistol and cold water on you?
Other than that?
Yeah, I mean like for morale and stuff.
Well, in the ejection seat there was a significant survival kit. But unless it wasn't of much use to you in the ground environment because it was more of you had to kind of get away from it. But things were there. There was some survival saws. There were some things. There was things to make a fire. The last thing you want to do is make a fire. There was some food in there if you were going to have to. If you could hit the road, like I assessed my situation the first time and the second, there was literally no place to go. I could not escape and evade. It was not going to happen. In North Vietnam, you could escape and evade, or in the northern parts of where it's hilly and the terrain's more uncertain, you could merge into the terrain, and you would obviously take your water bottles. There was extra water bottle in there, a can actually, and then there was food in there, and you'd want to take that with you. And there was a map, and you always had a compass. So you had to maintain orientation. You had to have a map. So those things were very important. If you landed in the water, of course, you had a life raft, and that was always inflated as a part of the ejection process, and it was tethered to you by a long 30-foot cord. So you came down in a parachute with a seat kit that was attached to your bottom, and you really needed to get rid of that because you didn't want to land with that seat kit; it could break your legs. So you had to at least let go of one strap and let it drop away, and then you'd be an inflated little raft dangling underneath you. The ideal thing in that would have been to land in the water and let the helicopter come pick you out of the water. Our plans were always to get feet wet over the China Sea if we could and get at least 5 miles out to sea so the sampans couldn't come get you and let the helicopters come get you. That was the ideal recovery. And then if you spent the night in your little floating device, you had flares, you had a flare gun, you had your radio, which was most important, so you could vector people in with your radio. And you had some means of eating and drinking some water for a 24-hour period in case you took that long.
After you got back to the base, after an exciting day, I mean, how would you relax, or was there any?
We'd go have dinner. No, it was very nice. It was a normal. When I flew with the Air Force in Benoit, we had a very nice living arrangement per se. I mean, it was the best you could expect. We had air-conditioned quarters. We had access to pop and beer and booze if you wanted to drink it. We had television, reading facilities, and we had a reasonable cafeteria. Most of the time we would all go to the officers' club for dinner. So it was nice in that regard. Now, when I worked with the Army, it was very unnice. It was shocking, the difference. So, there's a vast difference in living conditions in the war zone between the Air Force and the Army.
How did you serve the Army? Did you serve the Army, or was it more working with them?
Well, no, I worked with the Army my last 3 months as a forward air controller, and that required me to live with them at least 2 days a week. And that was, the war never stopped for the guys out in the field, and put you in a very different view of the war. We staged out of a place called Hoop Bend for about 2 months, and then the runway got unserviceable, so we had to move back to Benoit. And after that, our brigade moved up to a place called Song Bay, which was a little strip called Landing Zone Mary. And we were committed to support this colonel and his brigade around the clock, so that meant that one of us had to spend the night every night. So we rotated that duty. We had 7 facts, or 5, I guess there was 5 of us, 5 or 6. So we'd rotate that. And the most you'd get to do was spend maybe 1 or 2 nights a week up there. But when you spent the night up there, you came home literally exhausted because you got no sleep. The war never stopped. The guns never stopped blazing, so to speak. And the 155 howitzers are very loud. You never get used to them. And the fire zones the base was small, so if you had three 155 howitzers pointing in different directions, chances are one of them's coming over your tent. And when it does, it really whistles by and leaves a shock wave. And the people who lived there all the time learned to ignore it, but we were not there long enough to get acclimated to it. So you just try to rest and have pretty much a sleepless night.
The howitzer, was that a machine gun or a cannon?
Big cannon. Just makes. Yeah, that's what the Army was using. They had some devices there called long johns, which you never got used to them. They were huge barrels. We used the old barrels to define our taxiway. And we used the old oil drums from the Army to build a revetment for our airplane, so that we could have some protection for the airplane in case of incoming rocket attack. But the long john would shoot for like 30 miles, and it had a hydraulic device that would raise itself. You could always tell when you were going to fire it because it would raise and settle into a firing position. And you'd say to yourself, okay, it's going to go off, no big deal. Big deal every time. Never could get used to it. Didn't matter how far away from it you seemed to be, you'd always feel the heat blast, even behind it. So it was just an awesome weapon. And now the 155s were in there right amongst everybody, and they were just loud, just extremely loud. There's just no way to describe it, just loud, surprisingly loud.
Did you enjoy your experience as a forward air controller working with the Army?
Well, it was interesting. I don't know if I enjoyed it. The enjoyment's not the right word, but it was certainly interesting. Time flew by very quickly because we got to fly a lot. When I do my duty up there with them, I'd spend most of the day flying. I'd fly at least 2 sorties, just so I didn't have to be on the ground. But they were lengthy sorties, very interesting. You got to see more of the terrain, and you got to see more of the war from the F-100 perspective. When you're delivering ordnance at 450 and 500 knots, you really can't see what's going on. You see a target area, you see a point that you're trying to hit, perhaps, but you don't see the things happening. As a fact, you could see the people, and you could see the enemy, and you could see the result of what you were doing, and it was a little more up close and personal.
Is that when you got the OV-10 you flew in the forward air control?
Yes.
Was that an exciting airplane?
It was a good airplane for the task. It had 2 big turboprop engines. It had some storage space in the back. We moved twice when I was with that unit. We never had to have support to move. I was a scheduling officer. We just scheduled our own transportation. Really, we would take our beds and our refrigerators and whatever, and I'd assign 2 airplanes to the task of just shuttling back and forth to the new location while we got that stuff done. So it had a lot of flexibility in that regard. And the airplane, you could stay aloft about 3 hours, and it had some guns on it, and it carried 4 rocket pods, and we carried Willie Pete, and as well as HEI explosive, high incendiary explosive rockets, and it was a nice airplane. The only plane had no air conditioning, had no environmental control system, so it was a little uncomfortable. If you got uncomfortable, though, you just climb up to over 10,000 feet and just cool it down a little bit and then come back down.
So the other planes before had climate control units in it?
Yeah, that's right.
They'd be comfortable.
Yes. Well, they had bubble cockpits. You had to have it. You'd go around in full cold just to stay cool.
What other experiences that you had in over Vietnam? Yeah, that you...
Well, some interesting personal relationships with the Army guys. The Army was very difficult to work with. I was a lieutenant. There's nothing lower in the Army's protocol or hierarchy than a lieutenant, be it a first lieutenant or a second lieutenant. And so the leadership below the colonel level, he was a good guy, and he listened to me. But everybody else found it difficult to believe that an Air Force lieutenant could know what he was doing. So I didn't get much support from those guys. So you had to develop ways to not let that bother you. And we were living in the major's tent since we rotated the duty on a daily basis. Our ALO, our air liaison officer, was a major. The rest of us were captains and lieutenants. So the deal was we'd stay in the major's quarters when we were up there. That was very offensive to the other field grade officers, because in the Army, the hierarchy is quite rigid, and field grade officers and company grade officers do not intermingle. And so the majors found it just an affront that a lieutenant would be living in the hooch next door. And we defined that. We distinguished ourselves inside that tent quite effectively, I thought, because these Army majors chose to just sleep in an open cot with a mosquito net. Since there was so much incoming, we thought that was just fundamentally stupid. So we built a bunker inside the tent. So our cot was inside a bunker inside the tent, which was fully sandbagged, and we made it out of rocket boxes filled with dirt. And we had the only cooler on the base. So we kept a cooler of ice cold pop. We weren't allowed to have booze on the base since it was constantly at war. But we kept a cooler and we would get ice. And the Army never could understand us. We would take our Jeep about every other day, and we would drive off base, so to speak. And this is up at Song Bay Mountain. And if I showed you this on the map, I mean, it's jungle. And there's no base there. It's just this little 300-foot circle, diameter of about 200 yards, little encampment. So we would leave, and whenever we left, we have our flat vests and our helmets and our rifle and our guns, and these guys would always just be amazed, because they'd say, well, where are you going? As we went to, well, we're going down to the ice, man. We've got to get ice. We're going to go get ice? Yeah, we've got to have ice. You can't live without ice. Just amazing. So we drive down this little old jungle road. There's a mountain there. It was noted to have nothing big caves in it with the BC hospital and the NBA hospital. And we would go down and find this little Negrito tribesman who was always chewing betel nuts and had these ugly teeth, but he was the Iceman for the area. So we'd go buy some, and the way we'd pay for it with the ice would be to bring in several 155 howitzer shells. And he would take those brass howitzer shells and beat them into trays and different types of utensils that he would sell. So we got ice for brass.
Good.
But we had the only cold coat. So every night when I was there, I enjoyed this as a lieutenant living in the field grade tent with field grade officers all around me who would never speak to me or say hello or boo. I would say, hey, anybody want a cold Coke? Got a cold Coke in here? No takers, huh? Ice cold Coke. Oh, it tastes so good. I'd drink my Coke. And we had a light. We were the only ones that had a light. These guys didn't even have a light. So I had my little light on. I'd read a book, pretend that everything was okay, and then wait for the fireworks to start. And occasionally it really got nasty, because the place got overrun a few times, and there'd be sappers, these guys that call themselves sappers. They were in D.C. that would run through the camp with bombs and throw these bombs. They're trying to bomb people, so they'd throw these satchel charges everywhere. And so it was never a fun place to spend the night, but you just did the best you could, and that was one of my ways of relieving tension, was to put a little of it back on the field grade guys that ignored me.
Did they ever try to relieve tension back on y'all?
Well, they did some goofy things. I remember one night I was down talking to our airmen. I enlisted, again in the Army, enlisted and officers are totally separated. You don't enjoy the same privileges at all. But we had a couple of airmen that support our airplanes, and we thought they were good guys, so we'd go down and take them a cold Coke in the evenings and sit down and chat with them a little bit. So I was sitting down there fraternizing with the troops, to the Army's phrase, and the super sergeant came by, the master sergeant. His name was called a sergeant major for the colonel. And he came by and said, "Lieutenant, you got to get back to your hooch. We're going to have a practice gas attack." Now this is amazing. We're out there in the middle of a real no-kidding war. Real no-kidding shooting is going on around the clock. And this commander, General Marshall, decides he's going to have a CS gas attack. Well, he doesn't simulate it. It's the real thing. So he goes out and pops canisters of CS gas so that his guys can gag in the dirt if they don't get their gas mask on properly in time. It just, things like that just drove me nuts. But I said, okay. I told the guys, get your mask on. I went back to my hooch and got my mask on and sat there and waited for about a half hour until they finished their drill. But I never understood that. And also there's some rigid procedures the Army had that I found unbelievable. That sergeant that lost his life later, a month later, because the colonel had a policy that when the base came under attack, these senior sergeants would form up outside the Tactical Operations Center. And I told them, I said, "What are you talking about? Why are you forming up outside the Tactical Operations Center? Why don't you form up inside the Tactical Operations Center that's made with 1 by 1 foot timbers on top of each other and covered with dirt and sandbags? And why do you want to die?" And the answer was, the colonel says we're to form up outside. Well, guess what? The word went out, this is where these boys form up, and they just plopped rockets in there, and eventually they caught, and they killed all of them. So I thought that was just incredible. And that left a bad taste in my mouth. They would do things which made no sense. So.
Well, I see we're kind of running out on time, so thank you, Mr. Hargett, for this interview.
Thanks, Neil. I enjoyed it.
All right.